All right, well, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. We are going to be speaking with Dr. Andrew Feldstein from Fort Hays State University about the use of virtual communities to help build meaningful connections for students. Couple of logistics things. So we would love for this to be as interactive as possible. So please, we'll drop some questions to the audience throughout the presentation, but we also really want to hear from you. So feel free to put any questions or comments into the chat area or into the Q&A area. I am joined today by Danielle Bonner, who's from the InScribe team, and she'll be helping to monitor those spaces. And we'll alert Andrew and I when questions come in. We'll do our best to answer everything real time. So definitely put those there when you have them. And we are recording this webinar today, so we'll make it available after the session for you to watch or to share with others if you like. So just to get us started, I'm going to introduce myself first because I'm less interesting, and then I'll let everybody know a little background about Andrew. So I'm Katy Kappler. I am the co-founder and CEO of InScribe. For anyone who's joining us today who is not familiar with InScribe, we are a virtual community platform, and we are designed to help connect students with peers, faculty, and staff across a university so they can easily and quickly build relationships and connect to find answers and resources that help them succeed. We really work across the entire student learning journey. So we have communities that are focused on areas like enrollment and onboarding, academics, career planning. Today, we're going to have a great conversation about communities that are really focused on student-to-student engagement and interaction and fostering those spaces, but I won't talk too much about that because that's what Andrew is going to tell us all about. So my awesome co-presenter today is Dr. Andrew Feldstein, the Assistant Provost for Teaching, Innovation, and Learning Technology at Fort Hays State University. So Dr. Feldstein, I'm going to call you Andrew if that's okay. Andrew, I should say, we just realized Andrew and I met at EDUCAUSE in 2016. So that tells you how long we've been having these discussions and conversations. So we go way back. And I know that throughout his career, he has really been focused on building university culture to support disciplinary imperatives and career readiness. And he also works to promote self-determination, encourage curiosity, and emphasize the value of relationships in education. He is really focused on empowering students, particularly those who are from traditionally underserved backgrounds, which was a focus that was sparked early in his career while working at an HBCU. This experience really fueled his desire to help students discover and hone their ability to make meaningful connections, and then to use those connections to build a sustainable life journey. So today, in the current role, Andrew works to create and shape the learning ecosystem at FHSU and help faculty and students find the tools that they need to co-create meaningful and engaging learning experiences. So a lot of work and a lot of wonderful and exciting background. So thank you, Andrew, for joining us today.
Sure, thank you. That was very impressive.
So before we get started, I would love to know who's joined us today. So if you don't mind, just take a minute while we're talking to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you come from and what brought you here today. If there's something special that you want to make sure that you learn today, definitely let us know. We'll try to make sure that we cover that in the course of the conversation. And just by a quick intro, I'll sort of say a few words about why I know that I'm here and why I think Andrew's here. And I assume that this will resonate with folks, but this was a crazy year. And it continues in some ways to be. And it was a time when we really had to think about and learn about education and instruction and learning in very different ways. And I'm sure there's folks on this webinar who were already teaching and working in the online learning environment. But I'm sure that you would agree whether you were already working in online or whether you were working in a space that had to make a transition to digital learning, you still had to respond to different ways that your students were thinking and behaving and your instructors were working and living. And so today, and all of that collective work, I think caused us to sort of rethink some of the ways that we are supporting and engaging our students across the board. So today we're going to focus on one aspect of that, which is really that student to student engagement and conversation. And we're going to learn how Fort Hays has been tackling that challenge and opportunity themselves. So with that, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think first, just to give us a little background on Fort Hays State and sort of the type of university that you guys are.
Sure. We are Fort Hays State University in western Kansas. If I get in the car and drive 5 hours west, I'll be in Denver. And so we have a robust campus here. Currently on campus, there are a little over 4,000 students that are traditional on-campus students. We also have close to 7,000 online students, which makes for a very interesting mix. And it was one that I think really helped us as we moved through the pandemic because a very large number of our faculty were already experienced teaching in the online environment. So we were able to pivot in a way that we found that was fairly efficient. So yeah, that's us. We're a public university in Kansas, and our main goal, my main goal, is student engagement, student success, making sure, through much of it through what faculty are doing, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're looking to create lifelong learners who are going to be successful and great global citizens.
Yes, awesome. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of our attendees. Curious if you didn't mention it in the chat, would love to know from at your university or college, were you primarily on ground making the transition? Were you primarily online, or did you have the benefit that Andrew talked about of having that dual modality that you could sort of lean on what you've already learned and known to help with that transition? So, I know you and I, as I pointed out, that we've known each other for a long time, that we've been talking about, and you've been thinking about the concept of virtual communities for a long time. Tell us a little bit about what the tipping point was going into, coming through 2020 and going to 2021 that really pushed this initiative forward.
Well, sure. And it's probably not surprising to know that the pandemic was certainly a trigger for what we had moving forward. What we did, obviously back last March, we, like pretty much everybody else, made a transition online. Now, one of the interesting pieces was we had started that transition earlier, actually at the end of January, because we have face-to-face programs in China. And we learned end of January that those programs needed to go online. So we had spent most of February before we even got to what we were doing here on campus, building an infrastructure so that we could deliver those courses online. But here in Hayes and for our virtual students, the semester began as normal in middle of January, and sometime around spring break is when the world turned upside down for everyone here. And we went to, for the students that were the traditional face-to-face students, went to the emergency remote teaching modality, which differs, of course, from our regular online approach, which tends to be focused on asynchronous learning, whereas the remote learning, a lot of that, we adhered to the student schedules, and there were live Zoom meetings that happened during those times and that sort of thing. But at the end of the semester, one of the key things we wanted to know was how well we did through that process. And so we created a survey that we sent out to students, and here a couple of results that you see here were that, and the results were fairly good. 85% of our students agreed that the instructor seemed to understand and to be understanding of the unusual circumstances, and that 84% of our online students and 60% of our traditional face-to-face students agreed that courses remain consistent. And while that's not perfect, they were better than a lot of the numbers that I'd seen. Uh, One of the things that happened while we were doing this, we created this survey rather quickly, and the survey itself contains a lot of different elements, some directly related to the transition circumstances, but others, what we decided to do was relate directly with the community of inquiry survey, because there's a lot of items. We identified 16 items on the community of inquiry survey, which deals with teaching presence, social presence, and cognitive presence that we felt would be relevant to really getting at the student experience through this process. So that became one of the main pieces of the survey for the transition group that had gone online. One of the things that we noticed later was that the focus of this survey was by and large on the in-class experience. We wanted to know how students were doing in classes. And I guess that's a natural approach because, our main focus is courses and classrooms. And so that was where 90% of the questions on the survey were located. However, we did add an open-ended question, which is right here. This was question 11 on our survey, which is just asking them pretty much what this question's asking them is, so tell us about your experience dealing with your coursework and dealing with COVID-19. And we didn't initially, when we started looking at the data, the first data we looked at was the quantitative data. That was the easiest stuff for us to get through. Those were the things that we needed in order to come up with an actionable strategy so that we could go into fall. Because it was important for us to provide faculty with as much ammunition, if you will, for how to, because fall wasn't going to look that much different than the spring transition looked. So part of the data gathering for this survey was initially to be able to get the information to give the faculty a perspective on what the students were thinking and feeling. And we found it to be particularly useful. A lot of the faculty, when we reported the survey out, they, in a lot of the faculty groups, they actually used that survey as guidelines for how they were going to really design what the fall would look like. But this question was a little different. And this question,
Jumped ahead.
sure, that's no problem.
Oh, go ahead.
When I started to read the responses to this question, I realized that first I realized that by us focusing on the classroom experience, we were only getting at a piece of the puzzle. And it became really, really obvious when I started seeing the responses to this question 11. And you can see here that, the bottom line was students were struggling. And they were struggling to stay motivated. And they were struggling, a very large number of students talked about being depressed and talked about feeling totally disconnected from everyone else. And it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked to some other universities that I think had sort of similar experiences. And on the one hand, you can understand why during that transition, it was so frantic about getting the classes, digitized and getting them online and not losing the momentum of the learning, that everyone was so hyper focused on that. It was easy to miss how all these other things could also come into play that would have this, incredible impact on students as well. So I think it's great to have uncovered this, within your student population. I'm curious if other people on the webinar also put out surveys to their students and whether you saw any similar results in the feedback that you got. Here's a few more that we have those responses. You had so many. I think you said, Andrew, that you had to, pick just a tiny fraction of the very consistent feedback that you got on this from the student population.
Absolutely. There was this was, and one of the interesting pieces that um, I went back to these responses last night because I was thinking about this, and the responses that I've included here, and most of the responses we looked at that really were this dramatic, were from our students who had transitioned from on campus to the remote modality. But when I went back, I wanted to look at how how our FHSU online students responded to this. And one of the things that I found interesting was that nearly half of that population said to us, no change. Things were pretty much the same as they were before. And when I first looked at those responses a few months back, it was, oh, okay, good. No change. They didn't experience, difficulties moving forward. But the more I thought about this, and the more we think about our online student experience, the more I realized that the same may not be good.
Yeah, right. Because you pointed out, like they just got used to it being lonely and sad and didn't know any other way.
I mean, they were always disconnected, and we found that some of them did share stories about the disconnection being more acute than it had been, because a lot of them now had, we're now experiencing working from home with children at home and all sorts of other factors, and really wanting to connect with others and having a difficult time doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also speaks to kind of going back to the start of this, that we didn't just learn about the impact for students that had to transition, but we learned a lot about what online learning really is like for all students and the implications and the opportunities that might present. So I want to jump ahead a little bit to talk about, so clearly there was a need and your students were raising their hand really admirably to articulate what was missing for them. So let's talk a little bit about how you responded to that and the way that you started to conceptualize that virtual community for your students.
Sure. And one of the key things that really affected us is the concept of those, people call them negative spaces or third spaces. These are the places that a lot of student processing, synthesis, interaction happens, and it happens outside of the classroom. There's a lot of things that, typically students in a class, in a face-to-face class, they have the advantage of being able to see one another's facial expressions and body language and that sort of thing. And, one of the examples I like to give is, if a student is listening to a particularly dense, complex lecture and they're not getting it, one of the things you'll see is students glancing around the room, looking and potentially hoping to find somebody else that looks as lost as they feel. And that's a type of confirmation. But what happens then after that is those students tend to meet up after the class and try to process what happened. And eventually maybe that conversation will lead them to engage someone that didn't look like they were lost. And outside of that class, they now start to have a conversation around topics that they might feel that they're uncomfortable asking the instructor. And so you have those conversations. And they can happen directly after class. They can sometimes happen when students walk into a classroom before the instructor gets there. Sometimes these things happen when you're walking across campus. One of the responses that we had gotten in our questionnaire, that the students really, really missed the library. But they made it clear that they didn't just miss the library because of the resources in the library. They missed the library because that was a place outside of the classroom that they could hang out and process the things that happened in the classroom. So there's a lot of places where this stuff takes place that isn't the classroom. So conceptualizing the community that we needed to create here, to me, it was important to try to, as best as possible, replicate that experience, re-envision it as an online space where students could go free from structure, free from oversight, not a hierarchical. We didn't want to create a Q&A platform, didn't want to create a place that was classroom centric where they would be having conversations with instructors. It was really the hope for this platform that this would be a safe place for students, not just to to listen to what others are saying, but to share their concerns, to share things that they might not feel comfortable in other circumstances. And so that was the beginning part of figuring out how to conceptualize this community. And at that point, once I sort of had that idea firmly placed and we had finished our fall entry point and got everybody set up for fall semester, I think it was in October, I sent an email to Katie and say, hey, I think we need to do something here.
Yeah, and then I lost my screen share. 1 second, 1 second. All right, so I know, Andrew, you also were, a lot of this is the brainchild that came from you, but you also have been influenced or found like reinforcement in this model in some of the other stuff that you've been reading historically and recently. This one in particular, I know caught your attention, this write-up.
Yeah, this was the other day, I was having a conversation with someone and they said, hey, Jeff Salingo has a Future You podcast with, I believe it's Mark Becker, president of Georgia State. And so I went and listened to that, and they mentioned in that a hybrid campus paper from Deloitte Strata, which talked about post-COVID shifts and strategies people would use moving forward. And this is directly from that paper, which is build a virtual community that complements, not competes with in-person campus. And so I said, yeah, but this is something which a lot of people are thinking about at this point.
Yeah. And I think Danielle's going to drop a link to that article into the chat if anyone's interested in reading it. But certainly a hot topic, right? What are the long-term impacts of this COVID experience for university and education, and what things are going to stick? And this being one of them, just this idea that creating more flexible spaces that students can access benefits everybody, regardless of the modality of learning. So now you want to get down to the nuts and bolts. So kind of laid out your objectives. We talked a little bit about these, but sort of the goals for the community, if you will.
Right. And it's real simple. We were hoping, this is at heart a social network site, but it's a social network site that's exclusive to Fort Hays. It's login is required, and the access is through Blackboard, and I'll talk about that a little more in a bit. But we wanted to position it as more of something with an academic focus, if not specifically within classes, which is why the direct link is through Blackboard, so that students have their first connection with this will be there. But we wanted to set this up as a place for students, and we did not, when we started to put this out there, we didn't send invites to faculty saying, hey, go in and talk to your students. This was really about students going in and students sharing with one another in a place that they'd feel comfortable doing.
Yeah. And that private modality, the fact that it was, contained within the Fort Hays University experience, I think, from what we've heard from students that we've worked with, that complements that sense of security and safety. They know that, this is a space where they can be honest and it's, protected, if you will.
Right.
All right. So then you had to figure out the how.
And the how, and this is an area I've been working in for a long time and examining social networks. And one of the interesting things that we tend to see is that a lot of people tend to look at a move online as something which is handicapping them somehow in their ability to have the same magical types of interactions with students or with people in general. And if you look at an online community as a place where you're trying to mirror a face-to-face type of interaction, yeah, you're going to find that it's lacking. However, the bottom line is that there are so many more opportunities online that aren't available to us face to face. We think about things like just the asynchronous piece, where somebody can post something and nobody else has to be in the room when they do it, and yet people all over will come in and see answers to their question or comfort for something that they're worried about. And so being able to have that asynchronous piece is really important. A lot of the other tools that you have that sort of defy the whole time and space component of face-to-face interactions are the components of other social networks that people are familiar with. There's the like button. There's the ability to comment on other people. There's the upvoting piece. There's the ability to share things, the ability to post videos and photographs and articles and links and all sorts of other things that allow us to extend the conversation. And this community was rich with all of those aspects, is rich with all of those aspects. And so we're able to, so the students have all these possibilities for different ways to make these connections.
Yeah. Well, and I remember when we were first launching this and we had a conversation about, do you want to create communities that bring people who are studying the same material together? And should we slice and dice the community in different ways? And you were very adamant about, no, I really want this to be a place where people will find others that they might not otherwise have found across the university, across online and on ground, and really bring them together. And that's another benefit of being in a virtual space that's difficult to accomplish in that in-person, because you can just sort of mix everybody into the same location all together, and the types of relationships that emerge from that are pretty unique.
Right. And that was a piece of taking down walls.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that, yes, I know that this can be done I could have said, okay, let's create classroom communities and let instructors to have a community with their students. And I think that's a great idea. However, my first step was to try to create a holistic community for the entire campus so that people could discover people that they didn't know
Yeah.
and make the type of connections that they may not have been able to make before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so here's kind of where we ended up. So you want to introduce Tiger to Tiger?
Sure. And this is, if you look at this quickly, you'll see something that should make sense. And at a glance, and it certainly makes sense for the students, at a glance, what you see here is a social network that has the navigability that you would expect in a social network. You can browse by topic, you can click through to topics, you can see how many views you've gotten. And that's another affordance of social networks is you get an idea of how much traction what you're saying is creating, regardless of whether anyone is liking it or responding to it. You know that they're looking at it, and that's a cool thing. So over on the right-hand side, you can see popular topics. And one of the really, to me, one of the most heartwarming pieces of this was that the first ones into this community were not, as I had maybe thought would be, our traditional students that had moved online, but it was our virtual students, our FHSU online students that were first in. And Hello from Home had some of the most amazing posts with people introducing themselves from North Carolina, from North Dakota, from all over the country and the world, talking about who they were and where they were studying, and many of them expressing how thankful they were for this venue and to have this community so that they would have this place to connect to one another. You can see a post in the middle there, two best friends looking for friends. And of course, I looked at that. That is a heart sign at the end of that, not greater than three, which is what I'd originally thought. But the community, I mean, it's easy to navigate. It's easy for students to really it's just a matter of click a button and start a conversation. And we're getting a lot of great conversations going on in here.
Yeah. Yes. And I think one of the cool things about, you sort of alluded to this, but when you set this up, was not just the intentionality of having it be for students by students. So, not being overly influenced or by the administration or the faculty, but also, very committed to keeping the design of the community to be non-prescriptive. So you can see there's a few topics here that you put in place to help, I think really inspire people to understand, what some of the things they could talk about. But it's pretty open-ended. Like, the idea was, like, let's just let the students come in and see what they feel like talking about, and allow the community to kind of evolve relative to those types of things that you're seeing in there. So that was a really, I think, smart move from us, in terms of helping the students feel like they wanted to engage.
Right. And one of the other exciting things, and again, one of the features of the community is notifications, and of course, notifications are terrific. I have my notifications turned on so that I can see when new posts come about. And one of the first ones that really got me excited, there was a student who had posted out there that she was a beginning Spanish student. She was struggling with Spanish, and she would really love it if somebody out there would just, talk to her in Spanish, give her some hints on what to do, how to get better, and that sort of thing. And I saw this post come through as an email in my notifications, and as I looked at it, the first thing I said, I hope somebody's going to respond. I want somebody needs to respond, and I knew I couldn't respond. And because again, this is meant to be a student community, and I have to park my tendency to control things to the side. And so I looked just a short while later, and she'd already received a response. Somebody had written it, and the first two sentences in the response were in Spanish. The other person offered some support, offered to work with her, and provided some resources. And this is really the type of thing that I was hoping would happen, and seeing that happen all over the community for all sorts of different topics.
Well, speaking of which, I snuck in a few examples here that I pulled from the thing, which I didn't include, and I should have. There were some amazing posts, as you point out, about people just saying, like, greetings from, I think there's quite a few people from Colorado in there, a bunch of people from California, around the world. But I also thought this was kind of a nice sample of just the variety of things that students were asking about, something that some student had discovered and wanted to let other people in on. And this algebra one, which was very, sort of equivalent to the Spanish one that you pointed out, where somebody just raising their hand to admit how nervous they were to take algebra and how they felt like they weren't going to be successful. And the 6 responses, there wasn't room to sort of share all of those, but so heartwarming how everyone jumped in to provide encouragement. This one woman wrote like a 6-paragraph response to him about her experience with algebra and how how she persevered and became successful. So I just loved seeing the amount of support and also sort of fun that the students are having with it.
Hey, Katie, we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, please.
Can you explain to us how you handle inappropriate content that gets into the platform and within the community?
And that's a great question, and one that we had really thought a lot about initially. There has not, to this point, and we're in since February, really hasn't been anything inappropriate on the site. The closest thing we came to inappropriate, there's a bar close to campus called Chuck's, and there was one post that came in. It was one of the very first posts that said, "Who's going to Chuck's Friday?" And one of my student workers who had been in a moderator role sent me a Teams message and said, "Hey, should we take this down?" And I thought about it for half a second, and I said, "No, let's leave this go. Let's see what happens." And one of the interesting things that did happen, A couple of days later, someone else posted, yeah, um, I'll guarantee you in a couple of weeks, 97% of the posts on this site are going to be just like this one. Bottom line is there has not been another post like
Yeah.
that. The community, and I think part of the positioning and part of how we set it up and part of the tone is designed so that the students are using this in ways that, in a lot of the ways we'd anticipated, but the unanticipated ways are not are great and surprising and really cool. We do, there is obviously built into the community the ability if something goes terribly sideways for us to intervene,
Yeah.
but we have not had that happen and we hadn't seen the necessity to do that. And I saw something come in about 24/7 moderation, and no, this is a student moderated community at this point. Even the students that I had put in as moderators early on, I found that the other students didn't want to talk to moderators. They wanted to have this conversation with themselves. And so we we basically demoted. So, well, one our student moderators, we just put back in as in the regular student role so others would talk with them. There is the ability for reporting inappropriate behavior. We can deal with it if it's there, but fortunately, and I'll knock on wood over here, we haven't had any need to do that at this point.
Yeah. And I'll just add the platform itself does have some tools to help facilitate monitoring of content. So it'll, flag words or phrases that are, known to be inappropriate. It also will evaluate the emotion of conversation. So if the emotion in a particular conversation got pretty angry or frustrated, the system can proactively identify that and alert somebody. But as Andrew points out, the system's not anonymous, so what we see at Fort Hays and we've seen other places is you set the tone of the community, you kind of lay the groundwork and the rules for engagement, and the students are really good about following those. I was looking through the chat, but Danielle will let me know if we have other things that come in. So awesome. So I think I love seeing the content. We could talk all day about the types of questions and interactions that are taking place in that community. So they're so inspiring, but let's talk a little bit about how you continue to grow the community and some of the things that you're learning from the data and the experiences that you're seeing in there.
Sure. And one of the things that we did initially, and you can see here, is that when students log into Blackboard in their landing page, they see this. And they've seen this since it first started. So we've grown this community, and the thought was not to have a brass band and to really be sending emails and notifications out to everyone. What I wanted to have happen and hope would happen and is happening is that it's being built from the ground up. And by having that happen, once it reaches a certain point, and we're almost there, that we can then put out more broad announcements about it. I think it was good to watch it grow with the people that really wanted to get involved to start with. And besides the integration in Blackboard, which was our first step, I had conversations with a number of groups. I spoke with representatives from our virtual student senate. I've talked to the folks in student affairs about getting the word out to SGA. Met with the library, not because I wanted librarians in, but I wanted some of the students from the library who were the student workers who had been experiencing, they have other students that are asking them questions. And if certain questions become a pattern and they bubble to the surface, it would be great if these students would pop into the community and say, hey, over at the library, we're getting a lot of questions about APA style. Here's some tips, here's some resources. In fact, there was a APA conversation that went on in the community recently. I spoke with the folks from the Honors College in case those students wanted to get in and have discussions. So I've tried to talking with various groups just to try to slowly build this community so that when the people that are maybe less convinced that this would be interesting go there, they see a full-blown community and they see the opportunities there, and they see fun things and people they might want to connect with, and rather than more of a blank slate, which some people don't have they see it, well, this may be something sometime, but I'm not going to interact now.
Yeah. And we can definitely see the people that are in there now. Like you can see leaders kind of forming in the community already, which I think is a nice lead into this slide, which represents some of the analytics that you're starting to do around those interactions.
Right. And one of the things that we're hoping to do is to be able to get an understanding of what it is that the students are going to be talking about, who the students that are in fact the influencers in the community, that sort of thing, so we can get an understanding of things that we might be able to do to make it better and to build it stronger so that we can get more interaction. The little blurb on the right is, and this is research, general social network research, and it is a few years old at this point, that suggests that really only 1% of users create content. In more topic-specific blogs, network sites, you're going to find that that number tends to go up a little bit, but still, you tend to only find about between 1% and 5% of people who are creators of content. 10% will be actively liking or commenting, but 89% here, and what may be closer to, I'm guessing, 75% in a community like this, but that's one of the things we'll be looking at as we move forward, are going to be just viewing content. And what you're looking at on the left is a map of views. Each of the circles, the nodes that you see here, are people in the community, and in the middle where you see the arrows, that's 5 or more views from a particular person to the other person in that community. And so you can see, and the larger the node, the larger that circle is, the more views that person's gotten. And the colors are also, and the closer you get to purple, I believe the largest node is purple. My color, I'm a little color challenged.
Blue.
But yeah, what is it?
The biggest one is blue.
Okay, blue. The closest that you get to that blue, the larger, the most influence you have in the community, meaning that you are the person with the largest node, the largest blue node is most connected to the other people in the community who are most connected.
Yeah, right. And
So,
so I think the beauty of this analysis is, one, understanding, are you building this variety of connections among your students that you're hoping to drive, so you can kind of visualize that experience. And then the practical side, which is, oh, I can start to learn what students really care about and are thinking about and worrying about, and maybe I can do something with that information elsewhere in the university.
right, and that's key when we start being able to get information, and I can look at things based on keyword or based upon topic. We can really start to see where the robust conversations are, and the robust conversations are important for any number of reasons. One of the most important ones is if students are sharing concerns here, and it's something that at another level we can look at and say, okay, the students are telling us that there's an issue with Zoom meetings, and I'm just sort of throwing stuff out there. We can look at this as another valuable feedback loop from students and say, okay, what can we do to help that situation?
Right. And here's just an example, I think, from your analytics. It's still early days. We're a few months into this, but you can start to see some of the conversations and things that were trending. And, in the next iteration, we'll pull this up to that topic level and start to do some analysis on what can we pull out of the conversations to see what's trending and provide that feedback loop, as you mentioned.
We have a couple of questions here in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you find that people use it to form communities for specific classes to collaborate, or just ask questions?
We
So-
have
Yeah,
people
so go
that
ahead.
are looking to group up, and to have, conversations with themselves, but we've not yet created the ability for them to create smaller communities. That's something that we're looking at down the line. But once again, it's important just to keep, to me, the more eyeballs that can be sharing experiences that others are having, the better the connections are going to be. This is a community of, in many ways, a lot of the folks that will not feel comfortable enough to post are still going to gain a lot from this community just by reading the experiences of others. And so to be able to share those most widely was really our initial goal with this community.
Yeah. And so one thing we didn't talk about is within the InScribe platform, inside of a community, you can create sort of subgroups in that community. So one of the things Andrew and I have talked about is, as he alluded to, allowing students to either request or create micro groups that they can, bring together, maybe around a particular course or a major, or, who knows what the students might be interested in gathering around. So you can start to open that up. And then the other lens, so this is very for students by students, right? And intentionally will remain that way. There is another lens to it, which is creating InScribe communities that do intentionally bring faculty and staff from the university. And so maybe you create a community around student services, or you create a community around academics or a particular classroom where students have the ability to interact with each other, but also with those experts on campus. So that might also be a down the line thing. But Andrew and Fort Hays really wanted to start with that student to student use case, since it was the need that they were hearing so loudly in the surveys that they received.
Is there the ability to chat live within groups? So like a video interaction type of thing?
So we don't have a synchronous communication built into the platform today. We're actually building integrations for that right now. So you'd be able to launch to, if you're using Teams or Slack or Zoom, whatever type of more synchronous communication tool you already use on campus, we would actually integrate that into your InScribe experience and provide jumping off points for those.
Looks like that's all the questions that we have in the chat at this point.
Awesome.
Oh.
Well, if there are any other questions, please drop them in.
One just came in.
Say that again, Danielle?
One just came in. So how large is this community? I'm wondering if there is a sweet spot in terms of number of users for enough activity to keep the content relevant, but not too much that it's overwhelming.
Well, it's growing. And I think at this point, we have a little more than a couple of hundred.
Almost
students.
500.
Is it really?
Yep.
Oh boy, I better pay. I'm not paying enough. So, but again, it's the interesting thing, unlike a classroom discussion board or thing where you're requiring everyone to participate, this conversation is potentially driven by a few people. It is then confirmed by others that are going to comment on it, and then viewed by the vast majority who are learning from that. So if the numbers play out, and we're going to be looking at that as we move forward, if out of those 500 people, potentially 25% are actively either commenting or creating posts in the community, then the other 75% are just, they're reading the posts, they're gaining benefits from them and that sort of thing. Yeah. So even at 500 people, it's not going to get to the point that there's a lot of crosstalk. One of the other things that's good for this is that there are All right, I've just lost my train of thought on that one. I made the mistake of looking in the chat and saw a question that came through. And, and the answer to the question is about 10,000 students. Uh, but we can have, the other, yes, the other piece is topics. And by being able to structure by topics, people are going to the topic they're looking for. So even if it's a larger group, people are self-organizing by topic. And so that makes it easier for them to know what's being discussed within certain points of the community. They can filter by topic. They can filter by, what else can they filter by, Katie?
Within the channel, I mean, everything is searchable, so they can really get down to the very specific thing that they're interested in. So you can slice and dice the community in a lot of different ways to sort of find your niche, even if it's a big community. And I'll say, we have communities that have 30 participants, and we have a community that has almost 100,000 participants. So you can really, obviously those two communities are going to have different personalities, but the system really can create spaces even with a lot of folks interacting, so that it still feels personalized and you're still finding kind of your niche in that space to engage. I think we had a couple of others. So you talked about topics, Andrew. There was a question around, are you thinking about adding in links out to resources on the student services place? Like, I'm interested, I need some help with tutoring was the example that was provided.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about this type of community is you can, in fact, you can add links to resources. You can also embed resources. And so as we move forward, if we see needs for embedding specific resources in the community, we can do that. And certainly people are free to add links. One of the VPs, I think for the Virtual Student Senate, put her email in for people that want to get in touch with her about if they were interested in the Senate. So yeah, I mean, this is not designed, it's designed to only be closed in that it's a community for the university, but it's not designed to be a closed, self-contained community. The ability to have access to resources at your fingertips, to have people who are in the community that are going to say, oh yeah, here's something that it might have taken you 6 hours to find, and here's the link, and
Right.
it's all good.
Right. There is some, a porous nature to the other resources and technologies at the university, because that makes it more useful. Like, we have one last question from Bob about the use of social, audio as a way to facilitate communication for people who might be afraid of, putting something in text, that it feels a little bit more permanent that way. I'll say we are researching a lot of that. So video, audio, which can be brought into the platform today, but there are ways to do that a little more seamlessly. We also allow for students to post anonymously to each other. So if you're a bit nervous about your contribution, you can post something. The administrators can still see who you are. It's not fully anonymous, but it provides a layer of, I think, reassurance for people who are a bit anxious to contribute. So that's something we're studying right now that came out recently, and we're kind of evaluating the impact of that. But yes, we're really interested in understanding what holds people back from participating in a community, and whether there are tools that we can provide that would encourage more of that interaction. So I know, Andrew, you have another thing that you need to get to right at the top of the hour, so I don't want to hold you here too much longer, but I thank you everybody so much for joining us today. We appreciate all your great questions and all the great interaction in the chat. Of course, a huge thank you to Dr. Feldstein for joining us and for sharing your insights. We're going to have you back, I think, in 6 to 9 months. We can talk about how the community has evolved and what you have learned from it. But thank you again for being part of this and for sharing your story.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
If anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about InScribe, please feel free to reach out to me. I know Danielle will drop some links into the chat where you can get in touch with us, visit our website, reach out to me directly. We also have, I don't know if we have a slide for it in here. We don't. a self-assessment document that some of you might find useful. It's just a sort of an assessment that you can take to kind of evaluate how you're using community and engagement on your campus across a number of areas. It's a free tool. You can download it. We'll send you a report with some recommendations on things that you might want to try based on what you report back to us. And otherwise, thank you again. For those of you that are here early, let me know if you're ever in Denver, Colorado. We'll point out some great solutions. And I don't know if you ever found that Meow Wolf link, Danielle.
Oh, I didn't.
We'll send that with the follow-up email. So thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.